Prince Sihanouk introduces Mrs. Kennedy to Cambodia. The prince is not only the chief of state and its most dominating personality, but he's also the impresario of his country. And he's giving Mrs. Kennedy a kind of walking cram course on Cambodian ritual. He's telling her in French that these flower petals being strewn on the red carpet are part of a revered Buddhist tradition reserved for distinguished personalities. This is what's been advertised as a strictly private visit, but the welcome is very public. Hundreds of Cambodian schoolgirls have been assembled here to join in the greetings to the widow of John F. Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy is introduced to members of Prince Sihanouk's official family, and then to members of the diplomatic corps. The Chinese Communists, the North Vietnamese, and the Viet Cong's representatives, all of whom have missions here in Phnom Penh, are not present. There's also no American ambassador, and that's one of the reasons why Mrs. Kennedy's visit is regarded as having not only tourist importance, but even political significance. It was Prince Sihanouk himself who broke off diplomatic relations with the United States in 1965. Now, with Mrs. Kennedy's visit and Prince Sihanouk's recent criticism of Communist China, there's speculation that her trip here might produce a warming up of relations between the two countries. But the prince has anticipated that speculation, and he has said that despite Mrs. Kennedy's visit, Cambodia will not move toward any rapprochement with the United States. Nevertheless, there is right now, with Mrs. Kennedy here, a dramatic, if unofficial, American presence in Cambodia for the first time in more than 2 years. She will be spending about a week here in Cambodia, and she has said that this is a girlhood dream come true. Bernard Kalb, CBS News, at the Royal Palace in Phnom Penh.
I feel that this decision will only give license to bigots and racists to abuse the judicial process in order to block First Amendment privileges. On the other hand, I went to jail willingly and cheerfully because I've always said if you break a law or disobey a court order that conscience tells you is unjust, you must willingly accept the penalty. And we willingly accepted, we volunteered and surrendered. And I would say beyond that, that all that the Birmingham movement accomplished for this nation in terms of a civil rights bill and an impetus in many other areas, our jail sentence was a small price to pay. I must be honest enough to say that if our Congress and our government generally and white America will not respond to nonviolence on the economic issues as it responded to nonviolence on the question of public accommodations, then I fear that we are in for darker nights of social disruption, and I think our nation will end up with tragic violence and bloodshed which can bring the curtain of doom down on our civilization.
You might have heard it on the radio. Cornell has until 9 o'clock to live. 3 minutes after 8. Things are going to start happening.
The rhetoric was indeed explosive, and the fear of serious violence at Cornell had become very real. A meeting sponsored by SDS last night brought thousands of students into Barton Gymnasium and vocal shouts of support for the protesting militant blacks.
I would like everybody who's going to take that position to stand up. As simple as that. Yeah!
But for all the militant sound, the real mood it quickly developed was something else. It was clear in this crowd that all sides, the faculty, the students, the black and white radicals, and the conservatives, wanted some way out of confrontation. It was announced that a faculty meeting was scheduled for the next day, and there were words of caution from the speakers.
If President Perkins or the general faculty do not act tomorrow, I will be in here tomorrow night and I will be prepared to occupy a building. But tonight is not the night if you are a rational radical.
At noon today, the faculty began to gather on campus. It was the second faculty meeting this week. The issue, whether to reverse a decision the professors had taken last Monday and drop penalties imposed for illegal demonstrations against 5 black militants. Biology professor William Keaton.
As I will today, I will lose some of my own self-respect, because I will have given in to force, and force is something I have opposed for many years. I would much have preferred if you had let me come to a meeting on Friday and vote on the issue as the real issues were raised by the black students, and not because I feared you. You have made me lose some of my self-respect today, and I don't mind telling you that I resent it terribly.
The student meeting at the gymnasium had lasted through the night and into the morning. About half the Cornell student body seemed to turn out. Not all were radicals, and the hope was for compromise. And the word finally came. It was to be compromised. The faculty had rescinded the penalties. It brought this very public rapprochement between Cornell President James A. Perkins and the militant blacks who'd been leading the rebellion. Perkins saw what had happened as a new approach, not surrender.
This meeting that has been reported to me since the evening, last evening, through the night and this morning, I think is probably one of the most constructive, positive forces that have been set in motion in the history of Cornell. I, at least, am far from clear as to how an institution of this complexity and diversity will be able and should adjust itself so that the new priorities on the mind of man will be reflected in both the way in which we participate in, the values we employ, and the decisions we are going to make. I pledge again, what effort I may, to see to it that the university survives this transition.
To black students whose one demand was no punishment for what had happened, today was a clear victory.
I made a statement last night that's been quoted a lot about the fact that Cornell had 3 hours to live. And that statement came true because Cornell died at 9 p.m. last night when 6,000 students stood up in this room and said they were going to deal with their own destiny. They stood up in this room and said that the faculty and the administration no longer give us proclamations and decrees about what will be the status and the state of affairs at Cornell University. The old order has ended. This is the university community.
At nearby Syracuse University today, a sympathy march brought out black students carrying clubs as symbolic weapons. And a Cornell militant who had joined the Syracuse protest today said his fellow black students at Cornell still had their guns. At or near Cornell today, the method of campus protest had a new and disturbing look. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Syracuse, New York.
Yesterday, the gymnasium was filled with thousands of young people, engaged in a sit-in and patiently waiting for the inevitable announcement from University President James Perkins.
This meeting, I think is probably one of the most constructive, positive forces that have been set in motion in the history of Cornell.
Now that the point has been won, the question facing Cornell is what kind of academic community has survived this major confrontation?
Well, I think that very little has been won yet. The immediate issue has been resolved, but the larger issue in terms of, number one, whether students are going to institutionally control this university has yet to be settled. And the second issue in terms of whether this university is going to cease its racist policies and attitudes towards black students has yet to be settled and proven. For instance, the only violence which occurred over the weekend when we were occupying Willard Straight Hall was the violent attack on us by white members of Delta Upsilon fraternity. To this date, neither the faculty or President Perkins or any other official organ of this university has condemned those white students for attacking us. And in light of that situation, we have to say that we see very little as having been resolved.
I think that the way they did this was wrong. However, they have done it, and it is over, and peace is restored. And right now, we are beginning a fight to regain our image and to spread the truth about facts, not about principles or about a political issue, just about what happened, and to disclaim any racist image that we may have taken on.
This afternoon, the students will return here, not for occupation this time, but for the natural function of universities, to question and to review, and just maybe to come up with some answers that will forestall the next crisis here. Hal Walker, CBS News, Cornell University.
This is Francois Duvalier, the Lord and Master of Haiti, a man of absolute power. For the first time, Dr. Duvalier is being seriously challenged, and there seems little doubt that the group that is challenging him is communist. The opposition movement is small, and its chances, or anybody's, of overthrowing Duvalier in the near future seem very slim. For a dozen years, this man has ruled Haiti in a way that makes other dictators look benign, maintaining power by keeping his people in a perpetual state of terror. Fear is contagious, and the man who creates it lives with it too, going nowhere in public without his troops escorting him. These rare pictures of Dr. Duvalier's army, his civil militia, and his thugs, known as the Tonton Macoute, were taken as the president inaugurated the present session of his rubber stamp assembly. In the past, this army has had to wipe out several exile invasion forces, but they were badly organized, small forces, and represented little work for the troops. Now they have a different kind of task, that of coping with a recently begun series of terrorist attacks and assassination attempts, at least one of those attempts successful, on Duvalier's aides. Dr. Duvalier was trying to frighten the United States into resuming aid by developing a communist scare. Now it seems, as has happened to other dictators in the past, the creature is getting out of control of the creator. It is particularly unfortunate for Haiti that terrorism should break out now. There is little likelihood of Duvalier losing power, and it simply means more repression and more problems for the long-suffering Haitians at a moment when things were looking up a bit. At long last, Duvalier has begun to put a bit of his country's resources at the service of his country, building a road here and there, putting up a new airport, bringing in a few American factories to make shoes, dresses, baseballs. People, especially Americans, have started coming back to Haiti. The tourists do not notice the things that newsmen do, the ever-watchful secret police, like this one outside my window, one of several assigned to report my every move. Despite the increase in tourism and the small bow toward economic development, the outlook for this incredibly beautiful and equally tragic country still seems hopeless. Repression is absolute, graft still a way of life, fear and suspicion everyday feelings. And now, added to the cocktail of bitterness, there is a dash of terror, well stirred by a growing communist organization that is building its own future. Bert Quint, CBS News, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
The crisis was supposedly over, but for many at Cornell it was far from a normal school day. Instead of classes, there were day-long impromptu discussions in Barton Gymnasium. The main subject seemed to be how students should seek to change their university.
The blacks want to affect the black community, and the whites want to affect the white community, the Puerto Rican.
Okay, I think maybe we should have a preamble stating, because the problems of the city are the most crucial facing America today, that an urban studies center be established that will allow students to relate their education to the problems of the city.
In the afternoon, what's known as a teach-in, a series of talks on the issues in the crisis. Among the speakers, the man who organized the Black Olympic boycott last year, Harry Edwards, now a Cornell graduate student.
Black people must be qualified to deal with the problems that black people are faced with. This means that Cornell University has a responsibility. And we don't want to hear anything about, well, this cat comes from a school in Harlem and he's not qualified to get into Cornell University. White people do not have any market on the brains. Blacks are qualified. If Lynching beats Johnson with a C average from an unaccredited Baptist college in Texas can be qualified for the presidency of the United States, I see absolutely no reason why Cornell University cannot initiate a program to go into Harlem and into Watts and into the Huff District in Cleveland and qualify black people to come into this school and participate in the educational system relevant to black people.
Outside, Cornell's campus showed no visible signs of crisis. But among faculty members, there was some serious questioning about that decision to yield to student rebels. And these are some of the viewpoints. First, Professor Alan Sindler, who resigned in protest as chairman of the government department.
In the sensitive area of party politics, I do not believe I will have at Cornell University the full range of academic freedom, which I think any first-rate university must accord and protect for its faculty. When the faculty capitulates to coercion, it would be far better to stand up on your hind feet and say we are capitulating to coercion than it is to pretend the somewhat immoral charade that we have changed our mind free of duress and now embrace the very student coercion that brought about the reversal.
I think I have some right to say that there was an element of duress. But as I said on the floor of the faculty meeting yesterday, in some ways here we give up in the face of a kind of symbolic duress in order to recreate an atmosphere in which there is no duress. And that's what I'm interested in, preserving this university, of which I have been a part for, count them, 34 years. People can use words like capitulation and coward and abject surrender, and I think that these are words just like fascist pig and all the rest. They are just epithets, and as I've said to my own class I met this morning, I've learned after more than a half century a new lesson which shows that professors still do learn that the kind of respect that really matters is self-respect, and I have that right now.
I think most of the people who voted the right way did so for the wrong reasons, but I think the right reasons were easy to find. One group of people certainly voted out of fear. Another group of people voted because the president clearly wanted them to vote that way, and I think another group of people voted because they finally took seriously what had been going on all the time, namely the issue. And the issue was whether, in fact, the black students had been judged correctly and legitimately.
Good morning, this is Panchita Pierce. Yesterday we were talking with Dr. Leonard Kamer about depression. Dr. Kamer noticed and outlined for us the different types of depression and what can be done about them. However, depression is not limited to older people, and there is an alarming rise in depression among young people. Dr. Kamer, why are teens becoming more and more depressed?
Well, it's hard to say exactly why the teenage population is becoming more depressed. We seem to have moved from the age of anxiety into an exhaustion of that anxiety into an age of depression. I think the youngsters today are showing many signs of depression. They're bored. In addition to the violence that they're showing, which is an entirely different story, they're showing the restlessness, the boredom, the patterns of withdrawal. They're looking for a meaning in life, but they find no meaning in life. They're resorting to drugs. This is, I think, the largest single area in which I find evidence of depression in the youngster today. People don't use drugs unless they want to escape from a reality. You don't look for a high if you aren't low. You don't look for an escape into flying or into another world with acid or pot if you can handle the day-to-day stresses of living. And this to me means definitely depression. The youngsters today don't know which way to turn. They don't seem to have the kind of goal that one might want or seek.
Do they turn to suicide frequently?
Yes, they turn to suicide. Actually, suicide amongst the teenagers, if you want to include automobile accidents, and the use of the automobile as a fatal weapon with alcohol before it, means that it's the second cause of death. This is a very fatal illness amongst the teenagers. They kill themselves in a very high proportion of cases.
Have you found that parents are aware that their teens are depressed?
No, they're not. Actually, the book I wrote is directed toward the parents in a hope that they will recognize this depression. I think one of the sad things is that they think this is a big joke. They will not take the kid seriously, and the kid will go out and kill himself. This happens so frequently. We also see a large incidence of depression in the kids of divorced parents. This is a serious consequence of divorce in our society today. And the kids become depressed. They see the home disbanded. They have no identification with father or mother. They see parents in conflict. They feel alienated. They don't feel part of society. They turn to pot. They turn to drugs.
When they do turn to drugs, I know there is increasing concern in the medical world about the effects of drug taking, not only, well, more dangerous types of drugs, but even just aspirins. If you take too many of them, you become addicted to them and you can't stop. What is being done about this? Is this really, are we at a danger point now?
I think it's beyond the danger point. I think these kids are going to pay a big price in later years for having created a toxic condition in their nervous system. When you take acid or pot, alcohol in excess, and for the children, alcohol is in excess because the brain is growing, the brain hasn't fully maturated, and you start toxifying and creating a serious condition and destroy brain cells. Brain cells do not regenerate. And these kids are going to pay a price in their inability to study, to learn. They'll become dull in future years. I'm very pessimistic about what's going to happen to the kids who take all these drugs, especially the teenagers.
And yet, what is the alternative for a person who is depressed and he's on these drugs? How can you get to him?
I think this is a social problem, not particularly a psychiatric problem. I think that we must make better provision for interesting schooling, for good schooling. I think monies have to be spent for settling and resolving many of the social problems. I think we have to give the kids decent housing. I think we have to provide them with recreational facilities and learning facilities that are very good. My strong feeling is that too much money is being spent in other areas rather than in the area of social betterment. In our cities, we see this, and certainly nationwide. It's not only an American problem, it's a universal problem.
We've been talking with Dr. Leonard Kammer, who feels that depression can be treated, and that it's very serious, but most frequently it goes unnoticed. Panchita Pierce, CBS News, New York.
And you saved them overseas about a year, is that right? Pardon? About a year?
23 months.
23 months. Where do you live?
St. Louis.
Are those the only cigarettes you got, the ones I just saw?
There's one there and one's had in my pocket.
Right. Good to be home, huh?
This is the kind of welcome home every American GI returning from Indochina can expect for the next few months. And what the customs people are looking for, harder than ever before, is heroin. At Travis Air Force Base, there have been 170 GIs so far this year caught with heroin right in this inspection room. GIs are warned before they leave Vietnam that smuggling heroin isn't worth it, but some of them don't always listen.
Well, they give us a warning here at Long Bend about hard drugs. They say they have an amnesty of 5 minutes to get rid of all contraband items out of your possession and no action will be taken against you. However, one dude was caught and he's still back in the Nam. So I don't know.
Not everybody pays attention to that warning.
No, sir.
Even the military mails, another major source of drug traffic, are not exempt. Now inspectors are opening each and every package, not just when they suspect something. They are even using dogs specially trained to sniff out marijuana and some of the harder stuff. But an even more serious problem is the large percentage of GIs who come home carrying their heroin in their bloodstreams.
Probably 5%, maybe as high as 10%. We run into a lot of them. They have no narcotics on them, but they're obviously starting to go into heroin withdrawal, getting sick.
And even if it's not on them, what happens once they get out that door?
They're in trouble. They're used to 97% heroin in Vietnam. When they walk out the door here, if they can make a contact, they're going to get 4 to 7% heroin. And the price will be 20 times what they're paying in Vietnam. So they're in real trouble.
Customs officials believe this new search and destroy policy will have some effect on the flow of hard drugs, but in Indochina, heroin is so available and so cheap, it will be a problem as long as there are American troops around to buy it. Richard Felkeld, CBS News, Travis Air Force Base, California.
W. Dornell Stargell is an executive in a convenience food firm which distributes fried chicken in, among other places, Pittsburgh. Willie Stargell is a hitter who distributes baseballs into bleachers of the National League and provides material for the stylish stridency of Pittsburgh broadcaster Bob Prince.
Here's Stargell. Hits a drive into right center field. It is extremely deep, and you may have some chicken on the hill with Will.
If you time your arrival here as happily as Willie Stargell times his home run swing, your order will have that zesty je ne sais quoi called on the house.
The batter is Willie Stargell.
If you're about to open your wallet and the radio link to the game announces that Willie's done it again,
Okay, thank you.
you pay with a smile and get one back. At Pittsburgh's Three Rivers Stadium, the 6'2" outfielder chicken seller reveals a mid-season muscularity, a change from previous years.
I'm a man that enjoys the good groceries and Kool-Aid. So when I allow myself to splurge in those departments during the winter, then I have to suffer during the spring. But this year I was able to just make that sacrifice that I should have been making years ago.
The modern baseball dressing room sometimes sounds like a businessman's lunch with talk of franchises, commercials, and image. But the Pirates, as befits their name, still love the slap of cards and voices raised in Corsair song. Stargell's 11 homers for April, a record, have put him on the front pages. But even as he assembly lines autographs, his teammates keep him from accumulating the flab of fame.
Well, is this your last year?
Absolutely.
Absolutely what?
My last year. I'm going to China next year on that table tennis team.
Is this the best throw you ever got off to?
No, I got off my backyard one day.
Is this the most home runs you ever hit in April?
No, I hit 12 in August.
Is it true that you keep in shape by chasing chickens off the hill?
The all Jolly Rogers together atmosphere in Pittsburgh is helpful to Stargell.
They kid me about it. They want to know how far I'm behind Babe Ruth's pace at this early stage of the game, which is really nothing that of no real significance. I'm not concerned about it, but we were kidding about it.
Hitting students say he's swinging a little down from the horizontal this year, but the results seem to belie the theory. The medal announces that Willie is a Pisces, a group said to be unable to make up their minds, an idea which must shake the astrological faith of opposing pitchers. Stargell makes it look as if he did not so much hit them as fire them from a gun, but paradoxically he thinks about singles in order to produce homers.
When I'm trying to hit a home run, I find myself doing so many things wrong with the plate. I tighten my wrists, my arms, and I'm striding, and I'm pulling my head, my shoulders fly out. And that's a form of tenseness. But when I'm relaxed and I'm trying to go up the middle, the balls that I've hit will hit so much better than when I've tried to hit the ball, just being relaxed.
This was the record April homer. hit with 3 days and several rows to spare.
Now striding in, Willie Stargell, who wants to spread some chicken on the hill with Will. Stargell waving that menacing bat. The outfield swung deep and around to the right. Stargell swings, and there's a long drive hit deep in the right field, going way back she goes, and you may kiss it goodbye. A tremendous home run by Willie Stargell.
Do you sometimes think as the ball hits the wood that you hope somebody hasn't got a big order at that moment?
No, I never think about that. The thing I try and do is hit the ball. One particular time I hit a home run, and there was a catering order being taken. Well, I think they had 7 barrels of chicken, and that ran something like $40.
196 home runs in 9 years have kept the Stargell autograph in steady demand, but now it's bounding like a bull market. Even as the spotlight brightens, however, the ever-present sound of clucking is heard against a bovine base.
Let's have some chicken today, Will.
You gonna get some?
Yeah.
Okay. Stargell's shower of homers may have cost him a few chicken buckets, but the warm gravy of public adulation is a wonderful sauce for the loss. This is Haywood Hale Brown in Pittsburgh.
Busted flat in Baton Rouge, heading for the trains, feeling nearly faded is my gene.
The song Me and Bobby McGee, the odyssey of a hitchhiking couple, is one of the biggest hits of the year. Chris Christopherson, singing the number in a Greenwich Village club, is the man who wrote the song. The lyrics are in some measure autobiographical, reflecting his own journey through an unusual life and musical career.
Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free.
Christopherson is representative of a new breed of performer on the musical scene, which has been so long dominated by the rock groups. And this new breed is being called by an ancient name, troubadours, musicians who write both music and words and perform their own highly personal ballads as they travel the country.
On the sleeping city sidewalks, Sunday morning coming down.
Sunday Morning Comin' Down is among the songs that have made Christopherson known as one of the top current composers. Johnny Cash made it famous. It won the Country Music Song of the Year award in Nashville. His songs, his looks, and his way of life are all strikingly at variance with his past.
I wound up in James tonight.
This is Christopherson 13 years ago, when he was a football star, rugby player, and Golden Gloves boxer at Pomona College in California. An outstanding student, he became a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, where he studied English literature. He won prizes for short story writing and planned to be a novelist. Oxford was followed by 3 years of military service as an officer. His father had been a major general in the Air Force. But then, about 6 years ago, when he was 28, the pattern underwent a radical change. Instead of going through with the next step in his career, which was to be an English instructor at West Point, he left the Army, moved to Nashville, and began pursuing an old ambition, to be a professional songwriter.
What made me decide to quit was I was killing myself, and like I was volunteering for Vietnam, and I was living reckless and definitely not satisfied with the life that had been programmed out for me, and I knew I could not continue to live living up to these standards. And so when I said it was my last chance to bail out, it was not only artistically, maybe just for life, you know, I might have been a dead man.
Christopherson's early years in Nashville were a painful contrast to the rest of his life. He was struggling to survive. While trying to sell his songs, he earned a bare living by emptying ashtrays at Columbia recording studios or tending bar. His marriage dissolved under the strain of those years.
Likely or not, my lady, they won't hear it anyway.
What kept him going, he says, were fellow musicians, other unconventional young composers dubbed the Nashville Underground. Their songs are country-flavored, but their style, personal and professional, is different. They don't sing at the Grand Ole Opry or wear sequined cowboy suits. Their hair is longer, their ballads more complex.
All around the honky-tonks, searching for a sign, getting by on getting high on women, words, and wine.
I mainly just write about things that I'm feeling or that I have experienced that I think other people might do.
Recent months have brought Christofferson more and more success. For the Good Times, won Ray Price a Grammy, and Christofferson was chosen Country Songwriter of the Year by the other composers. But success has its drawbacks, as Christofferson himself recognizes.
Like I don't live anywhere, you know, just a little old living out of a suitcase, and all of a sudden I find myself scheduled so far in advance and rushing from one place to another and leaving somebody I don't want to leave and stuff like that. So I think you have to fight for your freedom all the time.
He's a poet, he's a picker, he's a prophet, he's a pusher, he's a pilgrim man.
One of his recent songs is The Pilgrim. He says that he sees many people in its lyrics. His friends say they are reminded of him and of his life.
And he keeps right on changing, for the better or the worse, searching for a shrine he's never found, never knowing if believing is a blessing or a curse, or if the going up was worth the coming down.
Bill Plant, CBS News, Nashville.
He's a prophet and he's a pusher. He's a pilgrim and a preacher and a problem when he's stoned. He's a walking contract.
Max Merrick quit the ring in 1940 after 400 amateur and professional fights. The hands that made him victorious in 90% of those fights now repair and finish furniture on Chicago's near North Side. Merrick is 56 years old. The years have not dimmed the memory of his greatest fight for the National AAU Light Heavyweight Championship, which he won by beating Joe Louis.
The first round, Joe had knocked me down. I got up and I listened to my trainer, Johnny Barry. He said, "Doctor, move that head, move that head." So I sure did. From then on, I kept bobbing, duck, weaving, getting inside, punching to the body, swing to the head, and then I'd push him off balance. I was lucky. I didn't get knocked out, and I won the decision and the championship.
Merrick coached boxing in the Navy during World War II. In 1969, he was asked by the Chicago Park District to participate in a program to revive interest in amateur boxing and to lure kids from the streets who might otherwise be headed for trouble.
Open your hand. Catch it. That's it. Did I ever tell you that?
Just how much trouble is reflected by the fact that in the past year, 2 of Merrick's protégés have been shot in the tough uptown neighborhood of Chicago. Most of the kids who come in do so initially out of curiosity. They're from disadvantaged backgrounds, suspicious of most anyone who offers a helping hand.
Hi, you did much better that time. Real nice.
The hope is that many of them, who've earned their spurs as street fighters, will learn that they can win as much recognition simply by fighting for the fun of it. They range in age from 11 all the way up to 25. Latin Americans, Indians, blacks, and whites. At 58, Tony Zale is no more than a name to these youngsters. But his reputation as the Iron Man of Gary, the former world middleweight champion, lends an added touch of glamour and importance to the program he's identified with as head boxing coach.
I was a very shy boy, very bashful, just couldn't face people. Boxing helped bring me out of it, because it was my favorite sport, of course. Mm-hmm. And that has the same effect in general. No matter who it is, if the boy is kind of backwards or forth, he'll gradually work himself up to where he'll have confidence, because he learns to take care of himself with his fists.
Don't get hit. You're not a punching bag now. You're not a punching bag.
For men like Merrick, the major headache is teaching fundamentals.
All right, hold it. See what the guy's doing? He's hitting you with hooks. You're not parrying either one of them. Get your hands up. That's it. Get your hands up. Oh, get them up.
One of his pupils is McKinley Torrey, a brash teenager. Torrey admits to his share of trouble. He was one of those shot in a recent fracas in Uptown.
I'm learning how to protect myself, how to watch the left jabs, the hooks, and duck them, and how to throw my right over his left, and to come up with an uppercut in order to get a knockout. But 11 months of boxing, I never got a knockout yet. I've never been knocked out.
Well, they say that this program is aimed at trying to keep kids out of trouble. How about you?
Yeah, I've been out of trouble for a long time. Since 11 months, I've been out of trouble.
Hands up. Don't get hit. Watch that right hand.
After only 8 fights under his belt, Torrey insisted on entering the Citywide Championships Open Division. This despite a warning from Merrick that he was probably not ready for it. Torrey had been in just 8 fights, his opponent in 50. And Merrick's doubts were quickly borne out. McKinley Torrey's 9th fight ended in just 44 seconds. Torrey said later that after being hit, he just wanted to stay there, on his back. But within a few days, he returned to the ring at the Clarendon Park Fieldhouse. His gloves were noticeably higher than they were the night he was knocked out. Max Merrick was back, urging him on.
McKinley, very good. Nice parry. Keep that right hand up. Says, we don't want to be professionals. I don't want to be professionals out of any of these kids. I hope none of them turn professional. But if a kid's got talent, he's got his heart and soul in it, don't keep them out of it. So I'd say 1 out of 1,000 in this program is going to turn professional.
Why don't you want them to turn professional?
You spend 5 years of your youth, say from 20 to 25, boxing professional. You get through with boxing professional. Now you go out into the world to earn a living. And what do you know? You know how to box. And somehow knowing how to parry or counterpunch a right hand doesn't help very much in the business world. So I don't like to have boys turn professional.
Murray Fromson, CBS News, Chicago.
Skateboarding is back, in case you hadn't noticed. The fad seemed to have died 10 years ago. Maybe they should have driven a stake through its heart, because here it is again. The revival started on the West Coast, where presumably some surfing type crawled up onto dry land and got himself a set of wheels. And in no time at all, the sport has evolved into a $4 million business. This time, the devotees include some older kids, and there are even some grown-ups who do it. And the equipment is fancier and more expensive. This plant in Whittier, California, is one of 20 in that state turning out the new model skateboards, which feature big urethane wheels. The old boards used to be fashioned literally out of old boards and worn-out roller skates, without all that plastic. Now, prices retail anywhere from $20 up to $50. It's a whole new market, and the sporting goods people are pleased, to say the least.
It's incredible. The parts end of it has become super. It's making its own industry because we can tailor a board to each individual, and that's where the dollars start to run into.
There are even skateboard pros now, and teams that go around demonstrating safety and tricks. Kids seem to pay particular attention to the tricks part. Big difference between surfing and skateboarding is that the surface on which skateboarding is done is somewhat harder than water. The makers of splints and bandages must be cashing in on the boom, too. Pedestrians with whom skateboarders share the sidewalks are not always as appreciative as they might be. There are some towns, Montclair, New Jersey, for one, that have banned skateboards. And yet there is no question the thing has caught on.
There's other things to do, but I don't know, all my friends got them, so I bought one.
When you get a lot of speed and you make turns and you try something really hard and you do it, makes you feel good.
I've done it before when I was little. It's like a fad. It comes in and out, and now it's back in.
Skateboarding may not seem particularly attractive to you, but don't knock it. If there's another gasoline crisis, we may all be traveling this way. Charles Osgood, CBS News, New York.
For some time, officials at the Justice Department have been waiting for the right occasion to ask the Supreme Court to reassess its position on busing. Attorney General Edward Levy fears that in some cases, court-ordered busing may have gone too far.
I don't think that the school system should be run by courts. I don't think the courts really want that. And I think all of us, including the courts, are learning about the problem. And as we learn about the problem, we've got to reread the cases, and we have to rethink the remedies, and we have to take into account the actual results.
If the Justice Department enters the Boston case, sources say it will support the argument of anti-busing forces that too much busing was ordered for the amount of discrimination involved. But the record of protests and violence by anti-busing forces in Boston poses a problem. If the Justice Department now supports the anti-busing case, that could encourage resistance wherever busing is ordered. Civil rights leader Roy Wilkins has told CBS News he has sent a telegram to Levy protesting any plans to support the anti-busing forces, and other civil rights advocates are also said to be urging Levy to do nothing. However, a strong anti-busing move now by the Ford administration could strengthen the president's hand in the upcoming election primary in Michigan, where anti-busing fever also runs high. Fred Graham, CBS News at the Justice Department.
Roll, please.
They're rolling on a new television season. The production costs of a single one-hour episode of a major series may hit $400,000 or more. Chicken feed compared to the hundreds of millions the networks and advertisers will spend. As always, it's a race not to make money, but to make more money than the other two networks, to find the formula to be #1 in the ratings.
Cold? Yes, and Chrissy and I are going to give you an alcohol.
One of the highest-rated shows is ABC's Three's Company, back for its second year, a show described by many in the trade as a classic example of TV's newest trend, jiggle television.
Jiggle television basically means women's shows, young women's shows. Women who are attractive, and when they walk, they jiggle. That's what jiggle means. Taking advantage of putting pretty girls on television.
And the plot that goes with that?
The plot? Mm-hmm. Oh, but no one discussed the plot. The jiggling is the plot.
Jiggle television began here at ABC with Charlie's Angels. The man who pioneered it is Fred Silverman, now the president of another network, NBC. Silverman claims he's through with jiggle TV. He even jettisoned one show that critics called exploitive, something called Coast to Coast. And he's banking on shows like Web, a series about network television, to lift NBC's overall ratings above #3.
I'm 29 years old. I've been in television for almost 10 years. I've done film documentaries.
But Fred Silverman or no, the jiggle trend is spreading this season to #2 rated CBS, and it's flying high, about 3 stewardesses and their numerous layovers. A premiere episode flew out of sight on the rating charts, but nosedived with critics. One reviewer saying, "No sex, no action, no problems, no interest." No one is conceding too much of the future to jiggle, though its ratings have clearly made it a moneymaker for the networks. CBS, for example, is promoting Paper Chase, about a law student and his professor. One advertising agency report called it the most intelligent new show of the season, and the one most likely to fail. The same sort of thing was once said of All in the Family, another show sometimes accused of intelligence. But Archie Bunker is back for his 9th season this year, and the producer doesn't feel threatened.
I think of jiggle television as kind of mindless television. I think of it as more visual than cerebral. I'd be very surprised if there were a great deal of debate among people who watch one of those shows afterwards as to what one character did or the other character did. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Jiggle television, to the extent it's possible, is obviously satisfying a need.
Just what need jiggle television satisfies is a matter of debate. But in the rating-conscious world of television, there is no disagreement over one thing. If it sells, it will stay.
Producers, network executives, advertising agencies, they're all looking for just what will sell. They concede they are mimics to a degree. One successful show spawns a half dozen like it. but they insist there are choices.
They've got 13 channels there. If that's quietly, without Z channel and all that stuff in the box. They can turn anywhere they want, including off. Off they can go, and go read a book, go talk to each other. Go look at your wife. Doesn't she jiggle?
David Dow, CBS News, Hollywood.
Deborah Mosley, age 21, Miss Georgia, hoping to be Miss America. She worked hard for her 36, 23, 36. Not just a pretty face, she wants to be a sports broadcaster. Clearly, she had good reason for being confident.
But when Deborah Mosley got here to Atlantic City, she found the level of competition very different indeed.
She found that 49 other girls worked just as hard as she did with physical conditioning, musical training, and other preparations. Each girl hoped she possessed the charm, talent, personality, intelligence, and beauty that mean Miss America. Deborah Mosley did not win the preliminary swimsuit contest in Atlantic City, and she did not place in the talent competition. So she knew then that the 7-minute interview with the judges on Friday would be very important. As the girls waited their turn, they were on edge.
I'm really not nervous, I don't think. Can't tell.
She came out of the interview feeling like a winner.
Well, hopefully this put me over into the top 10. And I think I'll really be ready to just sparkle tonight.
And she did sparkle that night in the evening gown competition. But then another setback in her drive to get into the top 10. Someone else won. Her loyal fans from Georgia were waiting at her hotel to cheer her on the night before the final competition, including her mother and father. Everyone reminded her that you don't have to win the preliminary contest to become Miss America. But Debbie may have begun to wonder.
Whether I win Miss America or not, that's not the issue, really. It's just the issue that I've gained confidence and poise, and I'm a 21-year-old young woman who's really found herself.
Then the competition on national television, the moment when they announced the 10 finalists. And Debbie Mosley was not one of those named.
When they first announced the first couple of girls and I saw the type, you can usually tell what type the judges like. Judges are human beings. When they announced the first girl, I knew I had made it. And it was just kind of like a revelation.
Debbie learned when everyone else did the type of girl the judges were looking for.
Eileen Barker, Miss Virginia!
It taught me not to want things so bad that it hurts too bad when you don't get it. I guess I just felt like I had too much at stake. I wanted this too bad for my own good.
David Culhane, CBS News, Atlantic City, New Jersey.
When they arrived at a high school in a mostly white working-class suburban neighborhood, black students showed little concern that during the night someone had burned a cross here. There was no tension following the isolated incident. About 1/3 of Wilmington's 65,000 school children were bused for purposes of desegregation. The goal is to have each school reflect the racial mix of the metropolitan area as a whole, 80% white, 20% black. Buses from the suburbs brought children to the inner city, some of the youngsters from 18 miles away.
I was glad to see this day come, and I hope that everything will turn out, and so far it's beautiful to me.
I think it's going to be great. You know, like black kids and white kids getting to know each other. It'll be a change.
Even organizations opposed to busing had anticipated an uneventful opening day. They predict that in a few weeks it will become clear the quality of education is dropping, and then they say trouble will begin. But no serious problems were evident. The children got along fine and didn't seem to share their parents' apprehension. Steve Young, CBS News, Wilmington.
7 bombs had exploded over the last 5 nights, causing a small amount of property damage and no injuries. The 8th was different. It exploded in the Speedway High School parking lot, critically injuring one person and severely injuring another. Authorities say the 39-year-old victims had watched their son play in a freshman football game. They were about to go home when police report Carl DeLong innocently kicked a gym bag that was lying on the ground near his car. The bag exploded, throwing him backward and tearing away at his legs. The blast also injured his wife, Sandra. Dozens of other persons were standing nearby.
It was a loud blast, a lot of dust blew.
What was going through your mind then?
Why does it have to happen here? You know, well, I just can't figure it out. It's scary, you know.
A score of extra police officers had been watching the town last night, trying to prevent the bomber from striking again. Federal agents have now taken charge of the investigation. Anxious Speedway residents have been told to report any suspicious objects to police. So far, there are no suspects, and no idea why the bomber is attacking this quiet community. Bob Rossback for CBS News, Speedway, Indiana.
Last night's bomb blast, which injured 3 people, was Speedway's 8th in 5 days. Each bomb was the same design, each exploded within a 1-mile radius and at roughly the same time, but police are baffled. A spokesman for the Department of Justice says police have no good leads, no known motives or prime suspects, and no one has called before or after each blast to claim responsibility. Today, a worried community canceled all nighttime school activities, imposed a curfew on its juveniles, and local businessmen offered a $2,500 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the bomber. Despite those steps, many residents admit they are still terrified.
I would say that people are staying more around their houses because, you know, you never know where the next bomb's going to go off, and they want to protect, you know, their homes and families.
I warn my kids, you know, not to kick any strange containers or anything. If there's something they see in the grocery store, you know, close to our house, to tell a grown-up first before they start investigating themselves.
Speedway police have intensified patrols of the area, but even so, few residents think that life will return to normal until the bombings stop.
Business has fallen off quite a bit, considerably.
And you blame the bomb?
Oh, yes. People don't want to come out.
So throughout the community, anxiety is growing, and now many residents admit what worries them most is not why the bombs exploded here, but when the next one might. Bob Fall, CBS News, Speedway, Indiana.
Los Angeles parents started receiving letters today telling them where their youngsters should be so buses can pick them up when school opens next Tuesday. The integration plan got a green light from the state Supreme Court late yesterday, and that renewed efforts to organize a massive boycott of the busing program. One anti-busing group, which called for such a boycott today, estimates that as many as 24,000 of the 30,000 children slated for mandatory busing won't go.
Don't take your children to school and let those buses roll if they're going to roll, but empty.
It has been a summer of heated protest over the busing plan, ordered by state courts after a 15-year legal battle. Opposition leaders say it is not a matter of race, but geography. In square miles, this is the largest urban school district in the country. Some buses must travel crowded freeways at rush hour for rides that parents claim could last an hour and a half one way. So more and more parents are taking children out of public schools.
I will put her in private school rather than allow her to be bussed away from me. I feel kidnapped from me because she is white.
Some kids have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. This is a big district just to get on the bus, just to serve time. It's wrong. It's intrinsically wrong.
Concern over growing anti-busing sentiment has prompted a Keep Cool campaign.
It is your right to test the order in the courts. But for the sake of our kids, let's show by peacefully responding to the law how we want them to remember us.
Busing opponents plan a last-ditch appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, leaving many parents waiting and wondering what next Tuesday will bring. Larry Peterson, CBS News, Los Angeles.
That building across the street is one of the fanciest cat houses in the country. But before you get your dander up, it's also one of the fanciest dog houses and bird houses. What it really is, of course, is the Lakeshore Animal Hospital.
There was a time in this country when you took your dog or cat to the vet only to get a shot for rabies or distemper, and you fed Fido or Felix with kitchen scraps, but no longer. There are nearly 250 million household pets in the United States now. Their owners spend about $3 billion a year feeding them, and if the pets seem a little peaked, they bring them to places such as the Lakeshore Animal Hospital, provided, of course, the owners have money. Lakeshore is a very sophisticated hospital indeed, and sophistication in medicine costs money.
Not one of them cried.
Feet.
They don't
In addition to the usual shots, the hospital offers elaborate surgery, everything from cryosurgery, in which the tissue is frozen, to the installation of artificial hip bones, an operation which costs about $600. There is a clinical pathologist on call who analyzes blood and tissue samples in order to figure out what's wrong with the animal. If the pet is a little dingy in the head, there's a consulting neurologist who figures out why the pet's dingy and what to do about it.
And frankly, you can view the inability to talk two ways. At least the dog doesn't tell you a lot of useless information and lies. His owner might, but the dog can't.
Sometimes that means straightening the owner out.
I had a neurologist call me one time and say that he just knew his cat, now this was on an emergency at night, saying that he just knew that his cat had a neurological problem. It was doing all these things and he was worried, but actually it was physiologically normal because the cat was simply in heat.
Back when the country was sane and not as rich as it is now, it never occurred to anybody that a dog could have epileptic fits, but it does now. That's this 4-pound Yorkshire Terrier's problem, and he's having his brain waves checked. The hospital also looked after birds who get into all kinds of trouble, even in their cages, apparently. This cockatoo, on the other hand, feels well enough, but is in for a checkup anyway, since she's valued at $3,000. Muhammad Ali's cockatoo was in not long ago because it was plucking out its feathers, a nervous habit the vets say is akin to a human being chewing his fingernails, except if you're a cockatoo, the habit can leave you stark naked, and nobody wants a stark naked cockatoo hanging around. The similarity between veterinary medicine and human medicine is startling nowadays, but of course there are differences. Very few human patients lick each other in the waiting room, nor do they shout at each other. And let's hope their reaction on leaving the doctor's office isn't like that of most patients at Lake Shore.
We were going somewhere else, like all the other traffic on Illinois 16, when we noticed what looked like a grave beside the highway. Funny place for a grave, so we stopped and asked around. It turned out that this place, which is just a crossing of country roads, has a special meaning for the people around here because of something that happened here once. It was a long time ago, the summer of 1965, when a little dog showed up here, a little black dog who seemed to be lost. Bill Stiff, whose family farm adjoins the road here, was 10 years old then. Probably it was Bill who first called the dog Blackie.
I can't, nobody can really tell, fully explain why he was here, but I've always theorized that he was dropped off or left or something, and he just stayed here and was waiting for his master to return. That's all that I can figure, and I really think that that's probably it.
He definitely was lost. He would sit and watch. He would get up on the bank and watch each car, and you could see him. He'd turn his head as the car went by.
Helen Parkus is editor of the weekly paper up the road at Oakland.
Often I saw him on this island, between the roads here, and just sitting there, kind of watching the traffic and apparently waiting and watching for someone.
The summer went by and the fall came, and Blackie kept his place here at the crossing. People around here worried about him, what with winter coming on, and more than one family tried to adopt him.
All the neighbors and everything brought food out here. I remember one account of a Thanksgiving that he was here, and there was more turkey bones there than anybody could ever imagine. They were stacked up high.
And he stayed right around here.
Yeah, he didn't leave. He wouldn't leave. I think unless a motorist had killed him, I don't think he would have ever left. I really don't.
That's what finally happened, of course. On an icy morning in early February, Blackie was struck by a car and killed. He was just a lost dog, and it all happened a long time ago. It's hard to explain the impression Blackie made on the people around here. Hard to explain why all these years later, the kids, like Jenny Whitmore, still take turns mowing the grass and keeping this place cleaned up. Maybe the explanation is in what they wrote on Blackie's grave marker. Blackie, February 6, 1966. Know ye now true loyalty and love. Charles Kuralt, CBS News, on the road in Coles County, Illinois.
Somebody once defined a folk song as a song that nobody ever wrote. Well, that can't be true. Somebody had to write them. But the truth is that, like a weed or a wildflower, folk music does tend to flourish in the country. This country, in fact. Why, there's quite a crop of folk songs, culled and stored right over there. What used to be an old barn.
Pretty work, brave boys, pretty work, I say. Stand on away, I'm born in man of war.
It's the home, studio, and meeting place of a company called Folk Legacy Records, a little outfit that was set up about 20 years ago by Sandy and Carolyn Payton with the help of some friends. The Paytons are still at it. Songs are like food here, and when friends come over, the songs get passed around the table like hot biscuits.
Oh, calamine lotion. Big bad bug with the bug spray.
We were both attracted to folk music because of its simple, honest values. It was music that you could tell wasn't written for money because the things that the music says are often reflections of people's real feelings.
All God's creatures got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher, some sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands or paws or anything they got out.
The fact is, people can make this music. You don't have to be a big star, you don't have to be a great singer, but you can do it yourself.
I guess everybody knows that in the field of pop music, it's very fatty. Some things come in and go out. And is folk music fatty too?
I think it was. A friend of ours calls the big folk scare of the 1960s, calls it that. There was a time when the audience for what was considered folk music, which were popular arrangements of folk tunes, was larger than it is now. And it was a substitute popular music.
Just a little rain falling all around the grass.
That big folk scare of the 1960s gave rise to some high-powered performers. And since it was so big and so popular, there was all the hype and commercialism of the pop record business. Big names, big crowds, big budgets, big money riding on it. And with that, the lines between folk and pop kept getting fuzzier, and folk rock became one word. The whole scene seemed to move pretty far away from the authentic, traditional folk music that the Paytons are all about. High-powered is not a phrase you would use to describe Folk Legacy Records. Its recording studio is the converted barn here in Sharon, Connecticut, that until recently was the Paytons' home as well.
I'm going to put you over here so that you feed this mic, because his guitar is going to be like this. Can you do it and still see? Yeah.
Sandy does the technical setup, checks the quality, does the engineering.
Rolling, take one. Take 1.5.
Keep on the sunny side.
And they both do the singing. In this case, helping to back up folk singer Laurie Wyatt, recording a new song of his.
And as we walk, let us clear a sunlit way and hope other souls will travel there.
You do not get a sense of pressure or tension here at all. Just some music making with the help of a friend and a neighbor and one of the Payton's sons there on the hammered dulcimer.
It will help us every day.
We don't mind if the keep on the sunny side, the K is not perfectly together. That's not. If the spirit of the thing is saying what the song is saying.
No, folks, that's not the way it's done downtown.
I don't want you to
trucks, and the equipment they use looks more like something out of the Manned Spacecraft Center at Houston. All those switches and dials, those teams of specialists. Multiple tracks, so they can build a record in several sessions.
Go back up to the top. Now listen right from the head. Yeah, we're getting there. Hey, we'll work it out. We'll work it out. Relax.
All very nifty and slick, but not at all appealing to the Paytons.
If you lay down the lead artist doing his track on Wednesday, and on Thursday you bring in the backup musicians and they put on headsets and go ahead and lay down another track, these people are not playing together. And there is something that happens when people make music together. There's a magic.
Dancing north, dancing south, dancing north and dancing south, dancing north, dancing south, pour a little moonshine in his mouth.
For the Paytons, making music together is a way of life, but it's a way of making a living, too. The record company accounts for about half their income. Some comes from performing here and there.
It is time to go now. Haul away your anchor. Haul away your anchor. It's our sailing time.
Thank you very much. Folk Legacy sells maybe 40,000 records a year altogether. Pretty small potatoes for a big record company. But for Carolyn and Sandy, that's just fine, thank you. And they don't mind handling some of the sales chores themselves.
Ours are number 30 and number 52 in the catalog.
And to stretch the family income a little, they also sell guitars and dulcimers. And Sandy functions as a justice of the peace. When this couple suddenly showed up while we were there and asked to be married, Sandy obliged and didn't charge a fee.
I do.
Apparently, he's not in the justice of the peace business for money, either.
No.
Well, there's a silence on the prairie. A man can't help but feel.
You might think the Paytons would get a little sick of folk music after so many years of it, so many hours a day. You'd think they might look forward to getting away from it, finally. But when the day is over and the recording session is finished,
Take me home to my sweet Wyoming home. Watch the moon smiling in the sky and hum a tune, a prairie lullaby, peaceful wind, and old coyotes cry. It's a song of home, sweet Wyoming home. It's a song of home, the sweet Wyoming home.
Let's have another chorus, would you?
When you come out here in the morning, it's not like golf where you got to concentrate on every shot.
For Earl Weaver, the screaming eagle of the Baltimore Orioles, mornings at home are quiet times, times to pick a peck of pickled peppers.
You can come out here and scratch the dirt and think about baseball.
Few men in the history of baseball have thought more deeply or more successfully about their sport than Earl Weaver. In his 12 years as manager, the Orioles have finished as low as fourth only once. They have won 6 divisional titles, 3 American League pennants, and 1 World Series. No current manager has a longer tenure with one club than Weaver does, and only Joe McCarthy of the old Yankees had a better winning percentage.
When you sit down to play a game of checkers or you sit down and play a game of monopolies and you read the rules, it states most of the first thing is the object to win. And that's the way it is in professional sport.
One tool Weaver uses more artfully than any other manager is getting on the umpire. He is not the loudest nor the most profane of baseball's bench jockeys, but he is the most persistent. He may not question the umpire's ancestry, but he'll question their judgment and their interpretation of the rules.
There's great ones, then there's good ones. Then there's the ones that start missing some plays. There's ones that are constantly in trouble. And then you've got the bad ones that you're always looking to replace. But I have no animosities to any of them, including the one that I'm talking about.
The one Weaver is talking about is Ron Luciano, the Laurence Olivier of big league umpires.
There's no doubt that the umpires are the most important people in the game. So now, you want them to do the best possible job they can tonight. In all instances, I'm going to say, but possibly in one.
Manager Earl Weaver is protesting the game, quote, because of the umpire's integrity, unquote.
That beau geste cost Weaver a 3-game suspension this season. There are no grand gestures in Weaver's private lifestyle. The pool is not really big, the house is small. And inside, he really does pickle that peck of peppers he picked.
And people have sent me hundreds of recipes. So now I'm trying a new one this year.
And he thinks some more about baseball.
Well, now the real second guessing starts. Playoffs and World Series.
And between tears from slicing onions, he makes plans for a post-World Series fishing trip.
Yeah, now the bus is free. What, the booze is free? We don't bring our own booze?
Weaver leaves the afternoon household chores for his wife and gets an early start for the ballpark in his Cadillac sedan. No vanity license plates. On the day of the Orioles' final home game before the playoffs, Weaver explains how a manager guides 25 temperamental athletes through a long season to victory.
At the start of the season, I try to explain to all my ball clubs that for the next 7 months, we're going to be together 7 days a week. Now, I'm not a strict disciplinarian. If he can't act right off of the field, and I still want him to hit me 30 home runs, and I'm going to accept what he does off of the field.
Weaver does not hold with the practice of fining players who step out of line.
I take pride in the fact that I don't think I've had to take people's money over twice in 12 years.
That night, having clinched another division championship, Weaver savored the congratulations of defeated rivals.
George Steinbrenner.
But one eye was on the stacks of charts and statistics he commits to memory as he prepared already for the coming playoffs. Later, in the dugout, even though his club was beating Detroit 13-2, Weaver bit his nails and exhorted his players. He even put up a ritualistic beef to the umpire about some arcane topic. And if all this care and preparation and persistence adds up to genius, as some have said, well, Earl Weaver may blush a little, but he won't call you a liar.
The genius level, or word, is derived, I'm sure, from the amount of games we won. Somebody decided, well, if he can win that many games, if he's got close to a 600 winning percentage, they decided to say genius. You know, other people are saying a lot of other things. You know, you got it from both ways.
There's a lot more to go by than meets the eye. You got to know where to look for it, how to do it.
Connie McClung passed most of this 21st summer of her life like this, in a wetsuit, face down in the South Fork of the Yuba River, looking for gold. The Houston Oil and Minerals Corporation spent the summer over on the other side of the Sierras like this, blowing away the mountainsides, looking for gold. We went prospecting in the Sierras last week. We didn't find any gold, but we did find a gold rush. We thought we'd discovered a pretty good story until we found out some other reporter, named Mark Twain, had already staked a claim on it.
Virginia City, Nevada.
from a distance, it doesn't look to have changed all that much from the old gold rush days when Mark Twain lived and wrote and prospected here. In fact, a lot of what Mark Twain observed about gold and the people who search for it still reads like today's news. The city of Virginia roosted midway up the steep slope of Mount Davidson, 7,200 feet above the level of the sea, and in the clear Nevada atmosphere was visible from a distance of 50 miles. The sidewalks swarmed with people, to such an extent indeed that it was generally no easy matter to stem the human tide. Joy sat on every countenance, and there was a glad, almost fierce intensity in every eye. That's how Mark Twain remembered Virginia City when he was editor of the local paper here in the 1860s. Now the sidewalks swarm with tourists. It is tourist gold that's kept Virginia City booming for the past few years, and that's all anybody ever thought it would be, an old boom town preserved in plastic, until the price of gold started pushing $400 an ounce. Now the Comstock lode is back in business. Houston Oil and Minerals strip mining the old tunnels on the face of the mountain, power shovels and trucks instead of picks and wheelbarrows. By January, this mill will be turning out the first gold bullion the Comstock's seen since the turn of the century. And so the trucks thunder past the old Comstock Cemetery, where Mark Twain took note the first 26 graves were occupied by murdered men. They are all here someplace, the men who opened up the insides of the Comstock and found enough gold and silver to build San Francisco and bankroll the Union Army at Gettysburg. The new breed of miners may have college degrees and corporate jobs, but they're just as full of glad, fierce intensity as the old sourdoughs. Houston's project manager, Don Hopkins.
Does it bother you at all coming in here into all this history with a lot of big trucks and big machines? You feel as if you may be violating something?
I don't. Some people do, but I consider it a challenge to me, just like it was to the challenge to the miners here 100 years ago. And we'll probably be part of history ourselves.
Frida and Jack Good were just about the last people to mine the Comstock back in the 30s. Gold was $35 an ounce then.
Could you or other small miners with a dream do that today?
They could, but very few will do that hard work. It's awfully hard work.
I would take a gamble if I could, but I'm too old.
Would you do it again?
I would. Oh yes, I would definitely.
How come?
That was, huh?
How come?
Because it's so interesting and exciting. It seems to get into a person's blood.
It gets into a person's blood. It got into Mark Twain's blood. We were drunk with happiness, smothered under mountains of prospective wealth, arrogantly compassionate toward the plodding millions who knew not our marvelous canyon. But our credit was no good at the grocers.
According to the geologists on this property, at the present-day prices, it looks like it's probably between $20 and $30 million worth of gold.
Joe LaStella came out from Brooklyn to the California side of the Sierras. He's part owner of the mining rights to a little chunk of the mother lode, and he and his partners are getting their $30 million out bit by bit. Colonel Ace Castle, U.S. Air Force retired, put up the money. Joe LaStella took it and bought a little bit of everything used to make this contraption work. We won't even begin to explain how it works, except to say that every 45 minutes, Mrs. Colonel Ace Castle skims off $500 worth of gold into that old Folgers coffee can.
I know when the gold goes up, I can actually know what my next day is going to be like by watching TV at night or reading the newspaper in the morning.
Frank Sullivan runs the Mother Lode Mining Shop in Sacramento. He's been in business 28 years, and he's never seen a summer like this one. He's been sold out of almost everything.
Why do people go out and pan for gold? Do they really expect to strike it rich, you think?
Oh, not really expect to strike it rich as much as getting something that no man has ever seen or touched. It's theirs, it's valuable, and is getting more and more valuable every day.
What kind of people are coming in?
Oh, all walk of life. I have dentists, doctors, movie stars, hippies. Some of them look like bums, but you don't take it at that. They've just been up on the river. There's old ladies, young ladies.
A lady miner. Mark Twain would have been astounded. There were no women among the strong-handed young giants of men in Mark Twain's world. Mark Twain once paid $10 and stood in line for an hour just to get a peep at one old lady flipping pancakes in the cookhouse. If you hike far enough, you can watch Connie McClung dredging for gold any day of the week. She's a lady, and she's tough. Panning for gold is tough.
If you're working down deep, you can get an air embolism when you're coming up. That'll kill you. You can have a boulder fall on you. That'll kill you. You can drown. You can run out of air and not be able to drop your weights fast enough. You know, you'll drown that way. There's a lot of dangerous things to do in something like this. You just have to use your common sense.
You have to wonder, of course, what makes people take leave of their common sense to do this sort of thing, especially when you wind up with nothing but rocks in your sluice box.
Now, what's this? A washer.
It's gold fever. Mark Twain knew the symptoms. Of all the experiences in my life, he wrote, this secret search among the hidden treasures of this land was the nearest to unmarred ecstasy. But then, Mark Twain was always gilding the lily.
This is the name of the game, throwing rocks.
Time was when Broadway musicals concerned themselves with the reaction of two young people to A Moon in June. Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber, authors of Evita, have chosen a radically different approach, and its effect and its intent have been the subject of international debate. Some critics in London, New York, and in between have denounced as insoluble the problem of presenting fascism in song and dance without making it seem as catchy as the music.
Hello, Buenos Aires. Get this. Just look at me, dressed up somewhere to go. We'll put on a show. Take me in.
Composer Weber and lyricist Rice are amazed that their portrait is regarded as other than a defense of liberty.
We never regarded Eva Peron as a heroine. We regarded this piece as a cautionary tale. It was written in England in 1975. It was a time when Britain was going through a considerable amount of political upheaval. And in a sense, looking back on it now, I think it may well have been a product of our concern about the dangers of extremism getting a toehold in Britain, which many people felt was a very severe danger. It is very concerning to us that anybody could remotely think that this piece is anything other than a cautionary tale.
What we're saying really is that if you have a demagogue or a fascist dictator or somebody who seeks to manipulate people, it's even more dangerous if they're attractive and beautiful. And in order to get this over, you've got to show why Eva Peron was able to fool so many people so often.
Put me down for a lifetime of success. Give me credit, I'll find ways of paying.
Eva Duarte, who married and, according to some, manipulated Argentine dictator Juan Perón, was an operator who went from bedroom intrigue to brass knuckles in her climb to power. Patti LuPone plays the woman whose early death from cancer caused rejoicing among anti-fascists and mourning in the jewelry, fur, and dress business.
Just a little time, just a minute.
I think you have to regard the piece as something of a musical documentary, in a way. It's rather like a lot of information being given to the audience. I mean, I think some people have criticised us for putting in too few facts. Some have criticised us for putting in too many, saying, well, we know about her, why don't we just concentrate on her? But I don't think a lot of people know that much about her. And we conceived it as a piece in which information would be laid at the audience's feet, and that they would then make the judgment, hopefully, that this is the sort of political figure who one has got to guard very strongly against. I think it's terribly naive just to assume that because she has been presented in some forms as an attractive figure, that we could in any way support her.
He supports you, for he loves you, understands you, is one of you. If not, how could he love me? I know Argentina, the chains of the masses.
The form of Evita is that of pop opera. The cue for a song being announced in song. A style Weber and Rice used in their controversial and successful Jesus Christ Superstar, in the opinion of some, to better effect.
In a way, it's almost easier because you aren't always going from spoken dialogue to music back to dialogue again, which sometimes can be a bit jarring. I mean, obviously, it's perfectly possible that to do it brilliantly. It has been done brilliantly on several occasions, but I think there are plus points for doing it our way and minus points. I think in the end it's either a good show or it isn't.
What we're trying to achieve, which is, I think, to develop this direction of continuous music in the theatre, has been, a good first step. I think much of the sort of interest in the show and the sort of adverse comment towards the show is really based on the subject matter. In a sense, I feel myself as a musician that a little outside that, in the sense that one wonders really how say Puccini would have tackled this subject, and I doubt if he would have worried about the politics at all.
Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you. All through my wild days, my mad existence, I kept my promise. Don't keep your distance.
Those who love Evita point out that composer Weber, if not Puccini, is still a man who puts beguiling notes behind his partner's words, while a good deal of the criticism arises from the spectacle of a malign force in a ball gown given a siren song to sing.
But all you have to do is look at me to know that every word is true.
That's O'Neill, Bob O'Neill. And this is O'Neill's World.
How about going with me?
Hey, I gotta have medications. It's definite. I have cancer of the lung.
Okay, let's go.
A world of the loser and the lost. A world of alleys and alcohol.
In the morning, you'll be going over to Southend Health. You'll be getting your lungs checked as usual. That's the routine. You'll be going to a hospital if you need it. No, Kurt, it's time that we work together.
O'Neill was once one of them. Now he drives a rescue wagon. He rescues alcoholics from the streets and from themselves.
There. I want you sitting right here. I got another guy over in the park I want to check on. Right. I want to see if he has a pulse, okay?
O'Neill works for Boston Detox, a non-profit detoxification center, a place for drunks to dry out.
Oh, Mr. Francis. There has to be a certain amount of control within inside me to be able to do what I do. Because a lot of times these, as you put it, drunks I pick up.
The news came too late to make any of London's morning papers. It is 5 hours later here than in New York, so morning commuters knew only what they heard on the radio, if they knew at all.
It's now clear that Lennon was shot 5 times in the chest, arm and back.
The reaction was low-key.
I think it's terrible. I think it's a great loss to the music industry.
Disgusting, isn't it? Can't say nothing more about it. It's stupid.
because I was in the 60s, so I remember him very, very well. Very, very shocked by it.
Well, to my age group, he represented the birth of new music and the freedom that we hadn't had till then. And it's just a dreadful act. We feel very, very upset about it. I'm sure everybody here does.
It's a great tragedy for people like me who grew up with him, but I think it's going to sell a lot of his records again.
Already a revival of John Lennon's music has begun here, but London has gone on to newer stars since the Beatles split up. John Lennon was considered a great musician, classic in his way. Martha Teichner, CBS News, London.
This store in Germany is owned by one of the giants of retailing, the Pentagon. Army and Air Force PXs do $3.5 billion of business a year, almost as much as Montgomery Ward, selling everything from dolls to pliers. But this whole system is now jeopardized by graft. Overall, prices in the exchanges average 20% below normal retail. But the prices on individual products vary depending on the deal the government strikes with the supplier. And military wives who shop the exchanges are not always happy.
This is $1.65, and I know in the States you can buy it for a lot less.
Christmas time is hard because the kids still know what's the big hot items, and that's almost unheard of to get here. You get the old last year's rejects.
Federal investigators are convinced bribery sometimes determines the product lines on exchange shelves. Members of Congress, alarmed at a burgeoning scandal within the Army and Air Force exchanges, have now summoned the Joint Chiefs of Staff of those two services.
That they clean it up or close it up. We are simply not going to tolerate this type of management.
The Army and Air Force Exchange Service, known as AFIS, is headquartered in Dallas. Unlike most government agencies, it does not use competitive bidding. Its buyers have wide discretion in determining what goods go out to stores. A 3-year federal investigation of the agency has brought 24 convictions on bribery and tax evasion charges, 7 of them against AFIS civilian employees. During the Vietnam War, Senate hearings into military club scandals were highly publicized.
Showed that hundreds of thousands of dollars were stolen annually from the machines. The thefts may have...
The PX scandal has not yet involved as much money and has attracted little publicity outside the military trade press and local newspapers. But Congress is now aroused enough to warn the existence of the present PX system is threatened by corruption.
It is absolutely systematic. It's long-standing, and very little is being done about it.
And is it major in terms of dollars?
In my judgment, it is major. I think that we've actually just seen the tip of the iceberg.
One AFIS official in San Antonio has gone to prison for taking a $5,000 bribe to see that Bibles published by one company were sold in military stores. A middleman representing several toy companies, David Zeef, said he split his sales commissions with AFIS toy buyer Paul Yelda, giving him $30,000 in cash over several years. Another middleman said he increased the exchange business of the Coleco Toy Company tenfold, from $40,000 to $400,000 in 1 year, by paying bribes unbeknownst to the toy company. Yelda now faces an 8-year prison term. Because military exchanges are regarded as one means of partly offsetting low GI pay, Congress is concerned about the effect of the AFIS scandal on troop morale.
They are stealing from these service families. And a lot of these service families own food stamps. It's a terrible situation. They aren't stealing from some faceless corporation of billions of dollars. They are stealing from the people who have 1 or 2 stripes on their arms. And it can no longer be tolerated.
The commander of the exchange service, Major General Dwayne Stubbs, has insisted the bribery and fraud are not widespread. He declined to be interviewed by CBS News, and his staff would not permit pictures to be taken inside the AFIS headquarters on short notice. Daniel says the problem is now larger than one general and one command. What is at stake, he will tell the chiefs of staff, is the future of the entire PX system as now constituted. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Dallas.
His Aunt Minnie had told him, "A guitar's all right, John, but you'll never earn your living by it." By the time he was 18, John Lennon was trying to earn his living with a guitar, joining with Paul McCartney and George Harrison to form the Quarrymen. By 1960, as they toured the dives of Hamburg, Germany, they were the Beatles. In 1961, a record store owner named Brian Epstein got them out of leather jackets and into velvet suits and ties and pointed boots and mop-top haircuts.
John thought of the name Beatles, and he'll tell you about it now. It means Beatles, doesn't it? You know, that's just a name. You know, like shoe.
The shoes. You see, we could have been called the Shoes for all you know.
By 1963, the Beatles had conquered Europe. And on a February Sunday in 1964, less than 100 days after John Kennedy's death, when the country was desperate for diversion, The Ed Sullivan Show brought the Beatles to America.
With a love like that, you know you should be glad.
The teenage girls screamed and the money rolled in. But then the familiar pattern of hype changed. John Lennon wrote a best-selling book in his own right, and the teenage heartthrob turned out to be a man of wit. The Beatles made a movie, A Hard Day's Night, and Lennon and his cohorts turned out to be mocking the whole machinery of fame and fortune. The music grew more complex, the lyrics subtler, darker, broader. With Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967, the Beatles brought the maligned rock and roll music form over the border between product and art. And always it was John Lennon who seemed the most outspoken, the most controversial. It was Lennon who caused an uproar when he said in 1966, "We're more popular than Jesus Christ right now." It was Lennon who was arrested for drug use in 1968, an arrest which threatened for years to ban him from the United States. It was Lennon who seemed to symbolize the journey of the 60s counterculture from "I want to hold your hand" to "Why don't we do it in the road?" And it was Lennon who, as the 1960s drew to a close, found and married Yoko Ono and embarked on a new life as the Beatles dissolved into bitterness.
Lennon was returning home for a late meal after an evening recording session with his wife Yoko when his assailant shot him several times. The former Beatle was rushed to nearby Roosevelt Hospital, but a spokesman said Lennon was dead on arrival. Repeated efforts to revive him failed.
There was a significant injury of the major vessels inside the chest, which caused a massive amount of blood loss, which probably resulted in his death.
Did he lose consciousness right away, do you think, from the...
I'm certain that he was dead at the moment that the first shots hit his body.
Police said Lennon's attacker emptied a .38 caliber pistol into the singer's body. The assailant made no effort to escape after the shooting.
We have arrested Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui, Kukui Street, Hawaii, for the homicide of John Lennon.
Investigators told reporters that Chapman arrived in New York about a week ago and had been seen loitering around the apartment building where Lennon lived.
He was able to obtain an autograph on an album from Mr. Lennon as he left for the recording studio where he was going.
A few fans gathered at the hospital, but hundreds more converged on Lennon's residence. Their tribute was a reminder of those days when the Beatles captured the hearts of American youth. Lennon's wife Yoko had returned here in shock. The faithful came to share her grief. Randy Daniels, CBS News, New York.
The shooting happened at the Dakota apartment building minutes after John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono left a recording session. When they got out of their limousine, a waiting gunman said, "Mr. Lennon," crouched in military stance, and squeezed off at least 4 shots from a .38 caliber pistol.
Within 2 minutes of the time I got there, they brought out Lennon. He was limp. He had blood coming out the side of his mouth. He had his glasses on, and there were maybe 5 or 6 police officers holding him, carrying him, putting him in the back seat of a car. And very quickly, Yoko was with him.
Lennon was rushed to the nearest hospital just a few blocks away, but was dead on arrival. His body was taken to the morgue.
We have arrested Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui, Kukui Street,
Hawaii for the homicide of John Lennon.
Chapman checked into this YMCA last Saturday, moved into a Midtown hotel the next day, was seen outside the Dakota over the weekend and yesterday. According to police, he managed to get Lennon to autograph a record album. During arraignment, Chapman was charged today with second-degree murder. He showed no reaction or emotion. The assistant district attorney said Chapman committed a deliberate, premeditated execution of John Lennon in a cool, calm, calculated manner. Chapman's court-appointed attorney called the shooting an apparently motiveless crime and told the court Chapman had tried twice in the past to commit suicide. Next court appearance is set for January 6th. Chapman will be kept under suicide watch while undergoing psychiatric evaluation at Bellevue Hospital. Steve Young, CBS News, New York.
4 years ago, Chapman came to Hawaii looking for the good life. His income came from a job in the print shop at Castle Memorial Hospital. He quit a year ago, but some there still remember him.
He did his job well, faithfully, sometimes even beyond what we asked him to do. He'd come up with even more creative suggestions than maybe what we had given to him. He just was just a good guy.
Printing was dull work, but he took pictures too and drew posters. He imitated Salvador Dali. This was Chapman's Dali favorite. He married and moved here, and until recently worked as a security guard. 6 weeks ago at this gun shop, Chapman bought a .38 caliber short-barreled revolver. On the gun permit, he indicated he was then unemployed. Chapman had no known local current police record, thus the gun sale was legal. Inside the Chapman's apartment building, his wife Gloria declined to talk to reporters. Others who knew him expressed disbelief.
When I heard the news, I would not believe it because it just seemed like a couple days ago I'd seen him out in front of the building. So I came down here to make sure that his name was Mark Chapman.
But on October 23rd, the day he quit his security guard job at this building, he signed out on the log with the name John Lennon. Then he crossed out the entry. Another guard remembers seeing Chapman in uniform. His name tag was pasted over with another name, John Lennon. A week and a half ago, Chapman left Hawaii for New York. He was alone. Bob Seavey for CBS News, Honolulu.
Mark David Chapman was born at Harris Hospital in Fort Worth on May 10, 1955. His father was an Air Force staff sergeant, but little is known about the early years spent at this Washington Street home in Fort Worth. Friends say that shortly after entering Columbia High School in Decatur, Georgia, he became somewhat of a loner. He is remembered for his Army fatigue jackets and long hair in the 9th grade.
He wore the Army jackets and maybe got a little bit on the rough side, if not rough behavior-wise, rough looking anyway. But the thing that I think I remember about Mark is that it seemed like the 11th grade, Mark became involved in the Jesus movement.
In his last 2 years in school, he became known as a Jesus freak and always wore a cross around his neck. His only extracurricular activity at school was the chorus, although he did play guitar in a rock band for a brief period. Friends remember his large record collection that included many Beatles records. He is said to have been a fan of John Lennon since childhood. After graduation, he apparently had to sell part of that record collection in order to pay for his move to Hawaii. His father, who worked for an Atlanta bank, remained in his home today, saying only that he would have no comment. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Atlanta.
We're either going to live or we're going to die. If we're dead, we'll have to deal with that. If we're alive, we've got to deal with being alive.
If you want to understand why a generation is grieving over John Lennon's death tonight, you have to understand where it all began. Not really in the cellars of Liverpool, but in the black ghettos of America, where rhythm and blues was born, and where, 25 years ago, it emerged into white America as rock and roll music.
We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on. Join me.
John Lennon was 14 years old when he first heard Rock Around the Clock, the song which became the international anthem of rock and roll, and which, as the theme music for Blackboard Jungle, seemed to link the music with youthful rebellion, even violence. Lennon listened to the music of Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Little Richard, Elvis Presley. As a member of the generation that came to adolescence in the first days of rock and roll, Lennon, with Paul McCartney and George Harrison, set out to play this music. In the process, they changed the music, and with it, the cultural landscape of the Western world. They started as the Quarrymen, leather-jacketed, greasy-haired imitators of American rock and roll. By 1960, they were playing the lowest dives in Hamburg, Germany, under the name The Beatles. It was a Liverpool record store owner named Brian Epstein who gave them the Beatle look, the Edwardian suits and ties, the pointy boots, and the mop-top haircuts. By 1963, Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and drummer Ringo Starr had conquered Europe. And in 1964, a combination of brilliant promotion and a desperate need for Americans to forget the recent murder of John Kennedy made the Beatles' first appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show a national event.
Ladies and gentlemen,
all a textbook case of hype and mass hysteria, except that the Beatles, and especially John Lennon, weren't playing by the rules. Lennon wrote an acerbic bestseller in his own right, whimsically juggling language and ideas. And most important, the music began to grow more complex, the lyrics more subtle.
There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed. The sea in the sky with diamonds.
By the time Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band appeared in 1967, thematically integrated with powerful, evocative songs, rock and roll music had passed over a cultural barrier once thought impassable.
If the rain comes, they run and hide their heads. They might as well be dead.
Among the Beatles, John Lennon was the point man in the growing confrontation with mainstream culture. And in time, he would meet and fall in love with avant-garde artist Yoko Ono.
All we are saying is give peace a chance.
In the decades since, John and Yoko held public demonstrations for peace and threw themselves into a wide range of therapies and movements. 5 years ago, John Lennon retreated behind the walls of New York's luxury apartment, the Dakota, to keep house and to raise a child.
When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me.
In grieving so greatly for a figure who was, after all, a musician, this generation is reminding itself again that for the millions who felt as John Lennon did, the music was the shaping impulse of its life and times. Jeff Greenfield, CBS News, New York.
Charles Hezakya has been neither a household name nor face, but his trial here in federal district court is changing that. Hezakya is the former Dade County, Florida policeman granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against fellow officers charged with the beating death in Miami of Arthur McDuffie, a black insurance executive. Their acquittal in a Florida state court last spring led to the rioting in Miami that claimed 18 lives. Now Hezakya has been re-indicted by the federal government on charges of violating Arthur McDuffie's civil rights. Hezakya charges double jeopardy and accuses President Carter of going after him in order to get black votes. A United States Justice Department spokesman gave assurances that the racial climate in San Antonio was suitable for the Hezakya trial, after Atlanta and New Orleans were both chosen, then rejected as sites for the trial.
The racial climate in San Antonio is good, and I see no problems and have no reason to believe that anything other than an orderly process of the administration of justice will follow in this community.
There is at least a surface calm. There have been no demonstrations outside the federal courthouse here, but leaders of black and Mexican American organizations in San Antonio angrily denounced the trial.
It is a sad day for civil rights because the one man who cooperated is the one man who is being penalized by being the only one indicted.
People are worrying about a riot here. If there is to be a riot, you know, it could happen in Miami. Miami is hot. The whole United States is hot. Chattanooga, Tennessee is hot. South Carolina is hot. Brooklyn, New York is hot. The whole United States is hot.
The trial of Charles Hezakya has begun and is expected to last 2 weeks. David Dick, CBS News, San Antonio.
Friends described Mark David Chapman in high school as being a loner, personable, quiet. His only school activity was 5 years in the chorus, although he did play guitar in a rock band for a brief period. Friends remembered his large record collection that included many Beatles records. In his last 2 years of high school, he became known as a Jesus freak.
My last recollection of him was as a Christian. I remember the cross. I believe he may have even had Jesus on his notebook, written or drawn or something like that. He's still pretty well stuck with the army jacket type dress, but his hair was neater, and like I say, his manner was calmer.
His father, who works for an Atlanta bank, remained at home, saying only that he would have no comment. Pam Olson, CBS News, Atlanta.
No one even noticed that on October 23rd, Mark Chapman's last day at work, he signed out as John Lennon, then scrawled over it. On his nameplate one day before that, he wrote John Lennon on masking tape and pasted that over his own name. For a year, he worked as a security guard and then maintenance man at this Honolulu condominium. Generous, remembered one resident, very religious. His former boss, Joe Bustamante.
We always thought he was a very good guy, quiet, normal, and he was a good worker. He did a good job. Nothing to indicate that he was crazy or whatever.
But members of the Church of Scientology across the street suspected Chapman was involved in tossing a rock through their sign. They believe he sometimes went to a friend's next door and listened to loud Beatle music. They kept their distance after Chapman bawled out a Scientology member.
All of a sudden, this guy, Chapman, just jumps in on me and starts screaming at me about this place being a cult and something really peculiar and attacking me and swearing at me, and I couldn't believe it.
There was something very strange about the character. Just basically, I guess the most obvious trait was this covert hostility that he had that was really very apparent.
Something you sensed beneath the exterior?
Yeah, there was a happy smile on the face, and then the squint in the eyes, like, you know, get you kind of a look.
At the high-rise where Chapman lived, his wife refused comment. A reporter thought she heard Mrs. Chapman crying behind the locked doors. 6 weeks ago at this gun shop, he bought a snub-nosed handgun, $200, cash.
It was a strictly legitimate gun sale. The guy looked like a normal, upright human being when he bought it. Nobody knows he's a schizo.
When Chapman came to Hawaii 3 years ago, according to some reports, he checked into Castle Memorial Hospital for an undisclosed mental problem. He later worked in the hospital's print shop. He was friendly, remembered one co-worker, perhaps a bit moody. A man who gave a friend a picture he painted, a rainbow, but who bought for his own a print by Salvador Dali of Abraham Lincoln, a mosaic of many colors and squares. In many ways, Chapman's life in Hawaii remains a jumbled mosaic. His friends are still trying to put together the pieces, are still wondering, could the Mark Chapman they have known here these last several years really be the same man who now stands accused of John Lennon's murder? Barry Peterson, CBS News.
This area of the country is a religious area. Religion is important. Clergyman is respected. I feel very pleased about that because what I do seems to count. All religious people of goodwill are accepted. I think it makes it easier in some ways to be Jewish here.
Here is South Dakota and a corner of southwestern Minnesota. You'd have to say that Rabbi Stephen Forstein's congregation is scattered. He is the only rabbi in 60,000 square miles. A 44-year-old rabbi born in the Bronx can feel a little lonely walking down the main street of Marshall, Minnesota. All Christmas decorations. No sign that this is Hanukkah. In a region of ranchers and farmers, Rabbi Forstein doesn't know of a single Jewish rancher or farmer. His congregation is one Jewish family here, another 100 miles away, another 2 or 3 in the next 200 or 300 miles. 0.1% of the population out here is Jewish.
How many of you know someone that's Jewish? No one. Okay, very interesting.
A high school sociology class in Sioux Falls.
Do you go by the Bible, or do you have your own books or what?
Oh, sure. You got it from us. The area is so heavily Christian that sometimes in schools and in general culture. Christian themes creep in so that it makes some things hard to explain to children.
Explaining to children. Explaining to Jewish children where he finds them. 13-year-old A.J. Flossman of Marshall has spent a lot of time hearing Rabbi Forstein's explanations. This Hanukkah has been special for him. His bar mitzvah took place during it. The rabbi traveled 95 miles from his temple in Sioux Falls to celebrate an evening Hanukkah service with Ev Flossman's family and to give A.J. his bar mitzvah lesson. It's the last time he'll make this long trip. Sometimes A.J. and the rabbi have had to hold instructions over the telephone.
It's very easy here in rural part of America, where Jews and others are thinly spread, to let go of these kinds of things. And when Jews let go of the symbols of Jewish life, eventually they slide into homogeneity, as it were. We cool the temperature and the yeast doesn't grow. And I want to keep the dough rising.
Rabbi Forstein has a special recipe for keeping the dough rising. Traveling and reaching out to people in remote areas are the key ingredients. He travels 600 to 800 miles most weeks. Luckily, he also happens to be a light bulb salesman.
Now, on the energy saver bulb,
selling light bulbs is an economic necessity for the rabbi. Selling them to school principal Arnold Smith takes him within a few miles of A.J. Flossman's house and makes it possible for this week's bar mitzvah lesson to be given in person instead of over the phone. All this is what Stephen Forstein calls making a virtue out of a necessity. The fact that the rabbi also sells light bulbs has caused a serious controversy among the more traditional members of the 60-year-old congregation. In the 2 years he's been serving it, some who had been in the congregation for a long time have left. Still, he goes on traveling, reaching out, putting Jews he meets in this vast countryside in touch with one another, trying to rebuild and strengthen his far-flung congregation.